Ukrainian military liberated and cleared the village of Bezsalivka of Russian troops. The settlement is located in the Sumy region near the border with the Russian Federation, according to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. The Defense Forces of Ukraine have liberated and completely cleared of Russian occupiers the settlement of Bezsalivka in the Sumy region, the statement says. According to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, the operation involved units of the 33rd Separate Assault Regiment and the 24th Separate Assault Battalion. During the hostilities, Ukrainian soldiers eliminated 18 Russian invaders. It is worth noting that on July 7, 2025, the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation claimed the alleged capture of Bezsalivka. The head of the Bilopillia community, Yurii Zarko, told the media that a few people remained in Bezsalivka. They refused to evacuate. According to him, there is no communication with the residents of Bezsalivka, mobile networks do not work there. We remind you that the Russians have intensified offensive actions on the border of the Sumy region. The Russian army wants to create a so-called buffer zone in the border areas of Ukraine. The State Border Guard Service of Ukraine reported that in the border areas, enemy sabotage and reconnaissance groups and small assault groups are actively operating. According to British intelligence, however, over the past 2 weeks, Russian troops have not achieved any noticeable successes in the Sumy region. According to analysts, in June and July, occupying forces likely seized 500 to 550 square kilometers of territory in Ukraine following monthly increases since March 2025. Russian troops continued tactical advances in the Donetsk region, mainly northeast and southwest of Pokrovsk. The occupiers are attempting to encircle the city and pressure remaining logistics routes. Russian forces have now occupied nearly all of Donetsk Oblast territory south from Pokrovsk, the report states. However, over the past 2 weeks, according to intelligence, the Russians have made no significant gains in the Sumy region. Constant losses and Ukrainian counterattacks have likely disrupted Russia's plans to establish a buffer zone.
The Taigan Reservoir in the Belogorsk region of the Crimea, annexed by Russia, has begun to become swampy due to severe shallowing. Local residents told Krim.Reli that many reservoirs in the steppe Crimea are becoming shallow due to the drought. A similar situation is developing in other regions of the Crimean Peninsula annexed by Russia. The Taigan Reservoir, located in the Belogorsk region of Crimea, has been shallowing since spring. A local historian speaking to a Krim.Reli correspondent on condition of anonymity suggested that due to the strong and prolonged shallowing, it is undergoing degradation and changes in its ecosystem. Currently, the Taigan Reservoir is experiencing siltation due to its strong shallowing, which increases evaporation, resulting in even more intensive drying of the reservoir. Siltation worsens the availability and very presence of food resources and habitats for the reservoir's fauna. There is a general change in the biota. Biota is a historically formed set of species of living organisms united by a common habitat. This will negatively and significantly affect the microclimate of the surrounding area, a decrease in air and soil humidity, a decrease in groundwater, the local historian said. The Russian authorities stopped dumping water from the Taigan Reservoir into the Byuk-Karasu River back in June, when the reservoir had already become very shallow. According to the local historian, since then the water has not been dumped anymore due to the lack of its useful volume in the reservoir. Water discharge from the nearby Belogorsk Reservoir stopped at the end of June, switching the reservoir to accumulation mode as a strategic reserve for the needs of southeastern Crimea. The reason for this was that with the onset of summer and the increase in water demand, the Russian authorities in Crimea increased the discharge of water from the Belogorsk Reservoir into the Byuk-Karasu River for the needs of southeastern Crimea, which led to an accelerated drop in the water level in the reservoir. Currently, the Belogorsk Reservoir is one of the most filled among the Crimean reservoirs. On the Crimean Peninsula annexed by Russia, a critical situation with the filling of reservoirs is developing due to drought. Shallowing and then drying up of rivers on the Crimean Peninsula began to be recorded practically from the end of spring and the beginning of summer. On June the 1st, Russian authorities declared a regional natural emergency in 8 districts of Crimea due to drought. In such difficult conditions, many people living in Crimea are ready to leave. This situation poses a threat to Russia. There are even such ideas that Russia will hand over Crimea to Ukraine without fight in the future. The summer offensive of Russian troops in Ukraine ended with advancement at the tactical level, and the counter-offensive of the Ukrainian armed forces has not yet begun. This is what former FSB officer Igor Strelkov-Girkin, who is serving a sentence in a Russian prison, wrote in his Telegram channel. According to Girkin's assumption, Ukrainian troops are supposedly simply obliged to strike, and to strike right now when the Russian offensive has run out of steam, and the occupiers are far from ready for defense everywhere. Their reserves have melted away or are completely exhausted. I am still ready to put 3 to 1 that the Ukrainian counter-offensive will soon begin, and it is unlikely that the Ukrainian armed forces will wait with it until September. I still consider the southern/Crimean Zaporizhia direction of their attack to be the most likely and dangerous, but they can, of course, strike in other places if they consider that it will be easier to achieve at least a small victory there. Girkin added that the war of attrition poses a dilemma for the Russian leadership: either abandon the peacetime economy and fight in earnest until complete victory and strive for it, or the war will soon be won alternatively, and probably not by Russia. Heavy blows are being dealt to the Russians in Crimea amid the expected new counter-attack. Recalled soldiers of the Ghost Unit of the main Intelligence Directorate of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine during a recent operation on the territory of temporarily occupied Crimea hit one of the most valuable radar stations in the arsenal of the aggressor state Russia, 98L6 Yenisei. According to the press service of the HUR, the rare and expensive radar Yenisei is part of the Russian air defense complex S-500 Prometheus. At the same time, this system can be used with enemy S-400 Triumph complexes. The defeat of Yenisei is a significant blow to the capabilities of the air defense system of the Russian invaders in the temporarily occupied Crimea. The fight continues, HUR message says. Earlier, Ukraine's domestic security service said on Monday that it destroyed 1 Russian jet fighter and damaged 4 other military aircraft during an overnight drone strike on Russian-occupied Crimea. In a statement, it said it had struck a military aviation depot, completely destroying 1 Su-30, damaging another, and also damaging 3 Su-24 jet bombers.